But let's begin at the beginning. As my 6-year-old daughter Grace would say, quoting Do Re Mi, her new favorite song of all time, the beginning, Daddy, is actually a very good place to start. So what is Nppd, the National Protection and Programs Directorate? Well, Nppd is actually a major component of the Department of Homeland Security, made up of 5 separate offices with overlapping but very different missions. The Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, which has as its mission the protection of federal government information and communication systems and protecting them from cyber intrusions and other threats. The Office of Infrastructure Protection, which analyzes threats to and vulnerabilities of the nation's critical infrastructure and shares that information with owners and operators. The Federal Protective Service, which is a law enforcement agency responsible for keeping federal properties safe and secure for federal employees, officials, and visitors. The Office of Risk Management and Investment, where Bob Kolaski and Dr. Deborah Elkins are from. And US Visit, which provides biometric identification services to federal, state, and local governments to help them accurately identify people that they encounter to verify if they're a threat to the homeland or not. The challenge that we have before Nppd and DHS more generally is how to integrate the efforts of these very different offices, identify opportunities for collaboration among them, and leverage their best practices to do the business of Homeland Security better. This integration effort is especially important given the vision that both Nppd and senior DHS leadership have for promoting a more resilient homeland. Now, I know that there are many different definitions out there for resilience, and they're used by many different people. And when I was a Hill staffer, I actually kept a glossary for the term to know what my bosses meant when they used it, to know what our witnesses who were testifying were meaning, how DHS used the term, and what the private sector was saying about it. And some of those definitions were very lengthy. Many of them were very academic. And unfortunately, many of them didn't come very easily to people and were too easily forgotten. And that's why I prefer the Timex definition that a friend of mine shared with me fairly recently. Resilience, he told me, is about making sure that America can take a licking but keep on ticking. And I think that actually sums it up pretty nicely. Today, the Nppd, like the rest of DHS, wants to do its part to make sure that America keeps on ticking, economically, politically, and socially, when we have a bad day. And that's why Nppd started a conversation last spring, asking some key questions about how they could be better in this mission space. What are the cross-cutting functions that span our different cybersecurity, critical infrastructure protection, and law enforcement missions, and how could we organize them better? What analytic products should we produce for our private and public sector customers to provide them with a more complete understanding of known and emerging risks? And what recommendations should we be providing to those customers to inform better risk management strategies and investments? And perhaps most importantly, how do we get our customers to care about what we're saying? To begin to answer those questions, Nppd senior leadership has climbed some mountains, forded some streams, and found their dream, their vision, a new Nppd analysis and modeling office. What they want is an office that builds on Nppd's current expertise and integrates it in order to provide products that promote more effective risk management decision-making before disasters strike. And what they believe is that by providing customers with this kind of heads up and then helping them think through the costs and benefits of different courses of action will help ensure that they and the nation keep on ticking. And that's where I come in. As a senior cyber strategist in Nppd, one of my primary roles is to figure out how to make that vision a reality by tapping into folks from across our directorate at all levels of the organization to basically get together and think through how we get from point A to point B. But before doing that, one must begin, as the sound of music makes abundantly clear, at the very beginning. And when it comes to analytics, that very beginning is a clear understanding of 2 things. What risk information does our local, state, regional, and private sector customers care about and need most? And how sometimes what our customers care about and what they need most are not always the same thing. Either way, Nppd must provide customers with information that helps them make informed decisions and where to invest their risk management dollars and what other action to take to keep their enterprises up and running when hazards happen. What I discovered soon after I started strategizing how to develop this new Nppd analysis and modeling office was that we truly were at the very beginning. I mean, we weren't even at do, let alone at do, re, mi. Why? Well, the simple answer is that until now, Nppd has had no formal information requirements process, no mechanism to identify or track what risks keep our internal and our external customers up at night. Nppd likewise has had no feedback mechanism, nothing to actually check with our customers to see if the products that we are already producing are adding value and helping them manage risk better. Everyone within Nppd agrees that this is a problem. It's also a DHS-wide problem, and everyone agrees that we need a fix to this immediately. And to be fair, it's understandable how we got here. In the aftermath of 9/11, DHS, including Nppd, scrambled to pull together an organization that was going to be positioned to prevent the next terrorist attack. And the pace of DHS's work in this regard really has not slackened one bit over the last 8 years. Given the day-to-day demands of the tactical environment in which Nppd and much of DHS operates, there just hasn't been much of an opportunity to pause and figure out what processes need improvement, in what order, or how. With the new Nppd analysis and modeling office, however, we now had that opportunity and a choice. On the one hand, we could have assembled a team that worked for months coming up with potentially amazing ideas for an analysis and modeling office that in the end would have had precisely no value because it wasn't addressing what mattered to people. On the other hand, we could first figure out what mattered to people. And that's when I discovered enterprise risk management. Now, when I was a Hill staffer, I did a lot of oversight of the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis. And specifically, I was looking at whether that office was providing state and local law enforcement officers with useful information that would help them be on the lookout for suspicious activity that might be connected to terrorism. And there certainly was no shortage of law enforcement associations and other experts in Washington, D.C. to consult with on these points. But I often found that the best thing to do in most cases was to log on to Google Maps and find a random city of random size in a random part of the country, and then look up the local police chief and sheriff and give them a call and ask them their opinions about how things should be working in Washington. Now, I'll be honest, some of the police chiefs and sheriffs that I spoke to did not at first believe that I was actually a Hill staffer calling them from Washington, D.C. In fact, one sheriff in North Dakota spent 10 minutes with me on the phone asking me what high school I was calling from and warning me that there were very serious laws on the books that would get me into a whole lot of trouble if I continued to misidentify who I was. Well, somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good, because when they finally did believe me, usually after I faxed them a copy of my business card, the information that they provided was phenomenal. Some chiefs spent hours talking me through their law enforcement mission, the work of their departments, their concerns about Homeland Security, and their ideas for what a DHS information product should look like that would be of most value to them to help protect their communities. I've taken sort of the same approach with Nppd. There's really not a Google function for my organization, but after a little homework and some friendly conversations, I soon found myself standing in the cubicles of some very smart people who happen to talk to governors and mayors and city council members almost every day. And these very smart people also happen to be the same ones who are getting an earful about risk from the private sector. And so when I asked them how we should go about organizing the new Nppd analysis and modeling office, 3 words were on everybody's lips: enterprise risk management. Now, I don't want to stray too far from my references to The Sound of Music and Julie Andrews, but suffice it to say that my only frame of reference for enterprise risk management at that point was Captain Kirk's capers with a certain starship of that name and attitude. But what my new friends told me about it made perfect sense. To help manage risk, Nppd needs to move beyond concentrating on specific assets, buildings, systems, and critical infrastructures. And instead, it needs to see all of these things as an interconnected whole. Enterprise risk management, they explained, is about getting critical infrastructure owners and operators and the department to look beyond their facility fence lines to the other infrastructures and systems and supply chains that are essential for keeping their organizations up and running as going concerns. So in my mind, the next logical step in building out proposals for our new analysis office was a logical one. Without validated information requirements to guide us, we needed to stand up an enterprise risk working group. And specifically, we needed to first figure out within Nppd what risks mattered most to our customers, and as shocking as this may sound, once we had that list together, actually go talk to those customers to find out if we were right and to help us prioritize. That customer input and our own internal expertise would help us form the foundations of the kinds of capabilities and qualities that the new analysis office would need to have. So we did just that. In early October of last year, we pulled together a group of over 30 participants from Nppd and DHS components for a briefing on enterprise risk management. And after getting folks up to speed, we spent over 6 weeks coming up with every enterprise risk that a customer had called DHS about, every emerging hazard that people's guts were telling them were actually a big deal, every related concern that the literature described, and every idea that we could gather from academia and other experts. And by early December, the Enterprise Risk Working Group had fleshed out 22 major risk categories for enterprise risk management, 142 subcategories, and even more subcategories. Our group was very enthused. Our minds were alive with the sound of such risks as cyber attacks, solar flares, IEDs, volcanoes, employee malfeasance, lone wolves, and severe thunderstorms. And it was very, very good material, but way, way too much. For a focused start to planning the new analysis and modeling office, we knew that we needed to pare the list down and start with the most pressing issues. And it was at that point that I once again put on my Hill staffer hat and had to learn about, interpret, and ultimately succumb to a wonderful law known as the Paperwork Reduction Act. Now, I enjoy reviewing legislation as much as anybody, but I was shocked to learn that the PRA, as it's called, prevented our group from speaking to more than 9 people about the exhaustive list of risks that we had come up with without first going through a many months long OMB approval process. We didn't have many months. And while I was falling deeper and deeper in love with enterprise risk management every day, and while I was very enthused about helping to build a new analysis and modeling office, I wasn't quite prepared to flee to Switzerland in order to avoid jail for a potential PRA violation. Luckily, a forced escape across the Alps was not in the cards. I'm happy to report that in the end, the Enterprise Risk Working Group was able to obtain tremendously helpful input from the maximum 9 stakeholders that the law allowed. Those stakers included a former governor, a transportation sector leader, a mayor who was also a high-ranking insurance company executive, an IT sector specialist, a financial services executive, and an energy sector leader, among others. And collectively, they helped us narrow down our list of 22 major risk categories to 9, and then to neck down the 142 subcategories to 34. Now, some of the 9 major priority risks really came as no surprise to many members of our group, and frankly confirmed what they had long suspected that was on the minds of our customers. They included cybersecurity risks, specifically IT system vulnerabilities that presented major opportunities for SCADA-type attacks, theft of intellectual property, and other cybercrimes, supply chain risks, specifically risks that arise due to the unavailability of roads, highways, and other modes of surface transportation, the unavailability of cyber and communication systems critical for just-in-time delivery of goods and services, the unavailability of ports of entry into the country and resulting shortages of energy, food, water, and medical supplies, and terrorism and crime risks, ranging from lone wolf shooters to WMD attacks to terrorist and criminal use of nanotechnology and other novel means to inflict mass casualties. The remaining priority risks, however, were something new, and put simply, they represent a brave new world, or should I say a brave new enterprise, for both Nppd and DHS alike. They include critical infrastructure dependency and interdependency risks, specifically the lack of domain awareness about how critical infrastructures relate to one another in a particular city or geographic area, and opportunities to mitigate points of failure at the local, state, and regional levels. The social risks that arise from private and public sector unfamiliarity with how a hazard's immediate impact could cascade across sectors at the local, state, and regional levels. And on this point, and this was a comment that several of the speakers earlier made, we heard time and time again from these stakeholders that they wanted access to models and simulations that would show their CEOs, their governors, mayors, and city council members the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects that might occur from an IT system failure, a pandemic flu outbreak, and from sustained power outages and telecommunications failures. They also told us that they wanted DHS to provide them with multiple options for action with cost-benefit analyses to help them make better risk management decisions to address these cascades. As a resident of Montgomery County, Maryland, and a Pepco customer, I must say that I've actually lived my own model and simulation during the recent thunder snow. A 10-hour drive home from downtown DC to a house with no power and a wife with 3 kids was not, as Julie Andrews might say, one of my favorite things. Needless to say, I can think of several scenarios that I'd like to share with Pepco should my family be without power anytime soon. But to this point, the stakeholders mentioned to our group another concern that they considered a major risk, the lack of a national resilience culture. Resilience, they emphasized, should not be just a word, it should be a way of life. And specifically, they told us that DHS needed to do a much better job of marketing resilience, not only to them, but to average Americans who need to know what to expect and what to do when disasters strike. They added that our making the business case for resilience would be critical for driving the risk management decisions and investments that we wanted our analytic products to inform. Several noted that the way to do that was to provide them with top-notch information products written in plain English with the audience in mind. Now, there were several other interesting findings from our stakeholder conversations. First and foremost, while terrorism and crime made the list of 9, it was not their top concern. In fact, it actually was toward the bottom. And this we knew was going to raise some eyebrows within Nppd. Although not overly scientific, our conversations were proof that from this point forward, Nppd's risk management mission will have to do more than just recommend guards, gates, and guns and to protect people and property from harm. Instead, Nppd and the analysis it provides must foster collaboration with and among private and public sector stakeholders to address shared problems in a way that makes everybody safer. And what also dawned on our group was that most of the priority risks identified by our stakeholders were as much about economic security as they were about homeland security. Put simply, if the power's off, if there's no clean water flowing, if the supply chain stops bringing life's essentials, and if money stops circulating, our way of life comes to a standstill, fast. And luckily, we were able to address all of these challenges on a Friday afternoon after some lunch and some singing following Fraulein Maria's return to us from the Abbey. Well, okay, not so much. But Julie Andrews did come to mind when I realized that we were still very much beginning at the beginning with the next major step of our work, defining the actual capabilities that the new Nppd Analysis and Modeling Office would need to address the priority risks identified by our Enterprise Risk Working Group and as validated by our stakeholders. In early January, we began our second set of meetings to think through those capabilities, which I should add are still proposals only at this point. But I'd very much like to share some of our thinking about those capabilities and how enterprise risk management concepts continue to shape it. As I mentioned earlier, Nppd senior leadership wants a new analysis and modeling office that integrates Nppd's cybersecurity, critical infrastructure protection, law enforcement, and other expertise in order to provide analysis that promotes resilience. What the work of the Enterprise Risk Working Group and the input of Nppd's stakeholders made clear, however, was that that vision needs to be refined further. Specifically, Nppd needs analysis to evolve beyond its traditional terrorism, natural hazards, and shorter-term product lines to include more future-focused analytic products. That sounds awfully nice, I know, but what does it mean? Well, to us it means that the new office will need to do more than just make the sale to our customers that resilience is the way to go and that they should use our products to make better risk management investments. The new office is actually going to have to provide Nppd customers with sufficient lead time to actually amend their risk management strategies and make those investments. We can't just spring products on people and expect that they'll automatically overturn their entire budget processes to accommodate our analysis. Instead, we'll have to prepare them over the mid to longer term for the hazards that, in our informed judgment, might be coming over the horizon. This means that the new Analysis and Modeling Office will need an agenda to plan the more strategic products many months, if not years in advance, with direct input from those customers about what analysis in what formats will be most useful. A resilient homeland, we concluded, is just not going to happen overnight. Rather, Nppd and its customers must build to resilience over time. And our team accordingly identified 4 missions that the new office must perform in this regard. First, as a baseline, strategic risk analysts will need to analyze known risks, showing how hazards resulting from well-publicized but perhaps not well understood risks might cascade across critical infrastructures, localities, states, and regions. At the same time, these analysts must provide alternative futures as part of these baseline assessments, changing their key assumptions in order to show how a hazard might cascade differently under slightly different conditions. This alternative analysis will provide customers with a fuller understanding of the risks they face and could include, for example, assessments of how related low probability but high consequence events might transpire. That fuller analysis, in turn, will allow for more informed decisions about what investments to make to address a wider range of related risks. Second, strategic risk analysts will need to conduct what we're calling pure futures analysis, using their informed judgment to forecast new risks and create plausible hazard scenarios that demonstrate how those risks might come to pass. This is where things get creative. To do this work, strategic risk analysts will need to draw on the input of scientists, futurists, subject matter experts, and Nppd customers to explore what might happen in the future based on available data today, and to make a credible case for directing resources to those anticipated risks. Third, strategic risk analysts will have to play a leading role in developing the simulations and tabletop exercises to test these forward-looking scenarios and to develop recommendations for action. And finally, these same analysts, given the creativity that they'll be bringing to their work, must be intimately involved in the design and construction of decision support tools for Nppd customers. Now, to make these missions happen, the Nppd Analysis and Modeling Office must have 3 key resources and attributes at the ready. First, and this is a point that another speaker had raised earlier, the office must have access to a wide range of subject matter experts. In short, addressing critical infrastructure dependencies and interdependencies, supply chain disruptions, and the lack of a national resiliency culture and related social risks will require subject expertise that falls far outside of Nppd's current mission space. For example, to help local, state, regional, and private sector customers understand the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects of an unmitigated hazard cascading across multiple critical infrastructure sectors and systems, Nppd will need to tap economists to evaluate the economic tipping points in a community, state, or region, psychologists and sociologists to explain how people will behave 5, 10, and 15 days into a disaster with no power, no communications or running water, or in their homes or businesses. They'll also need to tap resilience risk analysts to assess the interplay among the cyber, communications, and physical aspects of critical infrastructure in the affected areas. Based on the Enterprise Risk Working Group findings, our team also believes that the new Analysis and Modeling Office will need resilience marketers. These are the people who will help private and public sector decision makers, as well as average Americans, understand the dangers that an emerging hazard might pose and who can communicate persuasively to them the case for action. We likewise see the need for what we've been calling engagement specialists, who, as part of a formal information requirements and feedback process, will be in constant contact with Nppd customers about what risk information they need and what risk information is of most value to them. Among other things, these specialists will be responsible for finding out how customers actually change their risk management strategies to make themselves more resilient in response to Nppd products. The new Analysis and Modeling Office must also have an abundance of something that is too often missing across the federal government: humility. We need to stop pretending that we have or that we will have all of the answers. Strategic risk analysts and the other staff supporting them accordingly will need to understand how our external Nppd partners actually work, how they budget for risk, and how often. What motivates the private sector versus the public sector to change risk management approaches, and what formats they find most useful for our products. It's just like my conversations with that sheriff in North Dakota. Once the new analysis and modeling office breaks through to its customers, it's soon going to be hearing from them about what analysis they need and in what format they need it. And we have to be able to meet them on their terms, which will be great if we actually knew how to do that. To learn, the new analysis and modeling office will need to invite private and public sector risk managers to come work there, at least at the very beginning, to help teach strategic risk analysts what to write and how to write it. Only by making these customers part of the analytic process itself will the new office have a good shot at ensuring that its future-focused products are really offering value over time, in our humble opinion. That brings us to the third item that the new analysis and modeling office must pursue: a robust modeling and simulations capability accompanied by decision support tools for Nppd customers. During the Enterprise Risk Working Group's stakeholder conversations, our customers were clear. To make the sale on resilience, future-focused analytic products must provide them with multiple options for action, complete with cost-benefit analyses, and include models and simulations that illustrate how those options will likely play out and what will likely happen if no action is taken. Being able to personalize those products by allowing customers to populate decision support tools with their own data will make the most compelling case for action. In short, our customers want to know with at least some degree of confidence what additional resilience a new risk management investment or other action is likely to buy. Without this personalization, the new office will run the risk, no pun intended, of disseminating homogenized analytic products that without more will be too easy to ignore. Therefore, laying out all of this data in a personalized and compelling way will be critical to customers owning whatever ultimate decisions they make to manage and address risk. I should add that the benefits of this new strategic approach are certainly not limited to the external Nppd partner community. On the contrary, our group has had many discussions about how the new office will likely have a major impact on how Nppd senior leadership conducts its own policy, programming, and planning development, and certainly its budget developments as well over the mid to longer term. In short, if we get these pieces right, there's a very good chance that the new analysis and modeling office will bloom and grow and bless our homeland forever. Sorry, I had to say it. Now, as excited as our team is about the proposals that we're developing, we're also aware that whatever comes of them, we're going to have to take Nppd largely as we find it today, at least to a point. Today, Nppd has a very tactical mindset, with watch floors reporting up to the second on cyber intrusions and critical infrastructure hazards, and analysis teams responding daily, if not hourly, to information requests from the secretary, the deputy secretary, and others. And this battle rhythm will almost certainly continue long into the future. So whatever strategic risk analytic work takes root in the new office is sure to be paired with this faster-paced information sharing. And the challenge is frankly this. Historically, the exigencies of the moment have almost always trumped more deliberative strategic thinking within Nppd. And therefore, without some fix within the new analysis and modeling office, its people, equipment, and other resources will likely be rushed to whatever fire is currently blazing instead of being placed beforehand to prevent that fire from taking off in the first place. And the good news is that we expect this concern to resonate. During our deliberations over the last few months, our team learned that several enterprising individuals within Nppd had done at least some strategic analytic work involving critical infrastructure dependencies and interdependencies. One manager in particular had recognized the value of this kind of work to national resilience and had shielded it from the day-to-day operations of Nppd, so much so that nobody knew about it. The discovery of this development was like the sound of music to our ears. Our team quickly concluded that the new analysis and modeling office really needs to be a safe haven for precisely this kind of activity. So we spent a lot of time talking about what kind of firewall we would build between the strategic risk and the tactical risk work of the office. And one part of that firewall may well be the different skill sets that both sets of analysts would be bringing to the table. On the one hand, you have strategic risk analysts that would be trained to, over many months, put together an analytic product. And because of that, they might not be otherwise prepared to do a more quick turnaround, this is due in 3 hours type product. We soon came to realize, though, that perhaps this means that our group was not really living in the real world. given the scarcity of sources, analytic resources across the department. So we did come up with several alternative recommendations about how the new office could actually be organized that would help both of these focuses continue. First, we felt that the office needed to be directed by a single director who would be evaluated annually on the success of both the strategic and the tactical missions, and to drive the point home, make his or her promotions dependent upon the success of both missions. We also felt that there should be two distinct groups, perhaps headed by deputy directors who would report to that single director. And third, we actually would like to see both the strategic team and the tactical team physically separated, although in the same physical space, to minimize perhaps the temptation of taking away the strategic analysts into the tactical domain. And finally, we also felt very strongly that we need to have separate budget lines for both these kinds of work, and that the director of this new office would report to senior leadership the opportunity and other costs of taking away strategic analytic resources and putting them to a more tactical battle rhythm. Of course, we also want the strategic folks and the tactical folks to work together, so how we find that balance is going to be somewhat difficult, but we're just doing proposals. We don't have the answer yet. In closing, I must say that throughout our process, I've come to the firm conclusion that enterprise risk management concepts are well suited to supporting Nppd's evolving and integrating cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection missions. After DHS stood up in 2003, the focus was very naturally on terrorists and what they could do to destroy lives and people, lives and infrastructures. And a lot of what Nppd geared itself toward initially, therefore, was the physical aspects of protecting facilities, siloing them off and hardening them from attack. That approach just doesn't work when you're talking about securing cyber and communication systems that really are the invisible backbone of so much of the nation's critical infrastructure. Indeed, those systems are, in fact, the very threads that cross-cut critical infrastructures and enable them to function together, not only domestically, but worldwide. Whether it's controlling the power grid, managing the flow of water into residential systems, or maintaining the rhythm of the global supply chain, chances are that a vulnerable IT or communication system is involved somewhere. And that's really why I'm so excited about the direction we're taking with the Nppd Analysis and Modeling Office proposal. We're finally starting to think through risk like our customers at the enterprise level, where cyber, communications, and dependencies and interdependencies really play critical roles. Our customers have known this for some time, and many a thing they'd like to tell us about their approaches, and frankly, many a thing we ought to understand, and we're starting to. Enterprise risk management concepts today are helping us move beyond the tactical, beyond securing standalone assets and facilities, and toward more strategic risk analysis that cuts across infrastructures and sectors and geography to keep America ticking. And in the process, I think these concepts are helping to make Nppd a more integrated, collaborative, and ultimately successful organization. Thank you again very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm sure you agree that 85% of the infrastructure is in the private sector. When you talk to the stakeholders, who are the stakeholders you talk to?
We're talking to a couple sets, and I actually don't fully agree that 85% of the nation's infrastructure is privately held. It is. I think that we actually have a study ongoing right now, but we're talking specifically to governors at the governor level, Homeland Security Advisor level. We've reached out to some folks in some major cities, mayors and city councils. And within the private sector, we've used the NIP framework to reach out to some of our sector leaders.
What I was going to say is the private sector, the biggest issue is really how to get them to reallocate their funds.
Yeah.
And if you don't talk to the CFOs, you talk to the wrong people.
Yeah.
And cybersecurity risk is only a subset of ERM.
No, I fully agree, and I think part of the challenge we have.
It's not 85%, let's say 60%, 70%.
Right, and the challenge we have across government is we don't have an analyst pool that really understands the private sector. And frankly, most of them don't understand public sector governments beyond the federal government. And so, I didn't mention it in my remarks, but one of the things we'd like to do is really have a detailed program where our analysts would actually go to the field and see the business environment in which the private and public sector actually conducts business, so they have a better idea of what to do and who to speak to. I think that's the only way we're going to evolve people in that direction. Thank you very much.